Hey everyone, wherever you are, hope you're having a wonderful week so far. We're here with the latest episode of the Inside Crypto Show, interviews and discussions with regular people just like yourselves. Today we are joined by Tushar Aggarwal, the founder and CEO of Persistence. They are a Tendermint-based specialized layer 1, powering an ecosystem of DeFi applications focused on unlocking the liquidity of staked assets. We have to do the usual disclaimer: anything said by either Tushar or myself does not constitute financial advice. Our opinions are our own and not to be connected with our respective employers. Please do your own research. Because this is Tushar on the show today, we get to spend more time diving into his background, how he got into crypto, how you got to where he is today. Tushar, thank you very much for making time. Tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Kriyan, for having me. We were discussing this just before the podcast started, but I started my journey in crypto formally by hosting a podcast as well called Decrypt Asia. The thought process behind that podcast was to try and bridge quote unquote Eastern crypto and Western crypto, which in my view existed in silo and to some extent still exists in silo, although I think it's pretty much dominated by the West at this point. Very quickly, post the podcast in early 2018, I was the first employee at 𝕂𝕠𝕕𝕖 Ventures, which is the crypto arm of a traditional venture capital fund in Singapore. The traditional venture capital fund is called Golden Gate Ventures and has funded a lot of very prominent and well-to-do startups in Southeast Asia. I helped to set up their crypto arm, which included getting the fund incorporated, working with multiple service providers, lawyers, tax advisors, cybersecurity consultants, working with Monetary Authority of Singapore as the local regulator, since we were piggybacking off of Golden Gate's fund management license, and launched the fund. It was a 10 mil fund. The fund did quite well. We had sub $5,000 entry into Bitcoin, sub $100 entry into ETH, sub $5 entry into BNB, and had a bunch of other interesting deals on the equity side. I wanted to be in 2019, I wanted to be more involved in the industry and figured that there was being on the other side of the fence in terms of building was something that was a better way for me to contribute, where I could have a more meaningful contribution. And that's how Persistence came about. Myself and the team, we were early believers in proof of stake. This is when today, obviously, there's consensus that outside of Bitcoin, most other financial activity or chains operate on some form of proof of stake or delegated proof of stake consensus mechanism, but that was not the case in 2019. At that point, we had two options to build. One was on Tezos, which was live. The other was Cosmos. After having done technical due diligence, we decided to bet on Cosmos. It's been a 3-year journey. That bet is essentially paying off pretty well with the recent chatter around Cosmos. And yeah, high level speaking, Persistence is a Cosmos app focused on liquid staked assets. And P-Stake is the end user facing application that mint the liquid staked assets. I think up until even 6 months ago, I had to explain what app chains are. But I think today, relatively speaking, we're in a more fortunate position where I think folks have a decent idea of what an app chain is. And if folks don't, then obviously happy to go into that during the course of this conversation.
Sounds good. Thank you for that introduction, Tushar. That explains a lot and covers. There's a lot I want to unpack there. The first thing you said that's interesting to me, because I've lived in Taiwan for the last 14 years. I'm not from Taiwan, but like you said, Eastern and Western crypto is so different and you wanted to bridge it. What is the difference?
So I think for folks who've been in the industry long enough, I think there was a time in 20, let's say 16, 17, where, or early 17, where exchanges like Bittrex, Poloniex, obviously Coinbase were really big. This is pre-China banning crypto. And then I think in 2017, or at least the later part of 2017, there was essentially a shift, let's say in terms of trading activity, power, whatever you want to call it, in terms of Huobi, OKX, Binance coming in, which were, let's say, the more Eastern forces. And over time, exchanges like Poloniex, Bittrex, they just died off. Today, obviously, with the ban in China, with some sort of ban in other geographies in Asia, I would say like the power structure at some level has shifted westwards again. Finance obviously has become more global, and obviously Coinbase, FTX are, I would say, from a thought process perspective, are more Western in thinking. What I also mean is, I'm just been talking about centralized exchanges, but also in terms of projects coming and founders. I think I would say most of the innovation coming from the West at this point. Even in terms of newer projects, at least I don't see too much activity in Asia or people building from Asia. It's more of, let's say, from layer one perspective. I think it's mostly from the West. Obviously, it was in 2021. Terra was the big exception, but that blew up. So I think in the post-Terra world, I think so. That's what I mean by the Eastern or the Western influence on crypto.
Okay, that explains a lot. Do you think this is the way, or sort of the different crypto spheres exist because of the Eastern crypto regulation is moved faster than Western regulation in a sense? When we talk about like the Bank of India or Singapore, the Chinese, of course, Dubai, of course, being more open in a sense towards crypto. Is it just the regulation this side of the world is different, or why do you think things have happened the way they have?
I think it's more founder centric. I think promising founders will figure out the right jurisdictions and the right ways to operate regardless of regulatory constraints. But I think it's more about founders and where the founders come from.
So you mentioned P-Stake is the end user facing application of persistence. And that's really cool because I was looking at the website. I'm like, okay, how do I go about using it? And I went into P-Stake. I'm like, okay, this explains a lot. We've had a few liquid staking solutions on the podcast before. We had Anchor on at one point. So I was wondering, I think everyone's more familiar with liquid staking, especially when ETH transitioned to ETH 2.0. And then it was like, oh, okay, who is this 𝕂𝕂 person? And we had the whole worry in the bear market of depegging of staked ETH and ETH. So what are you guys doing when it comes to liquid staking that's different from 𝕂𝕂 or other liquid staking providers like Anchor? What is something that makes P-Stake and persistence stand out?
It's an interesting question, and honestly, there's no good answer for it, fortunately or unfortunately. High level speaking, what we have realized over the last almost 21 months that we've been working on liquid staking is that there are different ways of issuing the liquid staked asset. For example, 𝕂𝕂 uses the rebase model. In our early days for liquid staked Atom, we used the 2-token model where you split apart the principal token and the token in which rewards are being accrued. And now we're moving to more of a C-token model where the number of tokens that you have remain the same, but the value of the token increases. So it's basically different ways of accruing rewards. And different liquid staking solution providers use different models based on the use cases that they're going after. But truly speaking, beyond that, there is not too much, let's say, I don't want to use the word innovation, but there's not too many things that you can do from an asset issuance perspective. You can figure out which token model works the best to accrue rewards. Post that, what are the things that matter? Number one is that because with liquid staking, as a service provider, you are introducing smart contract risk, and so security becomes imperative. And that's our biggest priority, that the liquid staked assets are being issued in the most secure manner. What is the second most important thing? It's liquidity. How liquid is the liquid staked asset? Because if somebody wants, you mentioned the depeg issue, ultimately the liquidity issue. Obviously, that's more unique to Ethereum because you cannot unstake. For other assets like BNB, Atom, you can actually, if the liquid staked asset is trading at a discount to the underlying asset, you can obviously long the liquid staked asset, unbond it, and sell the underlying asset to realize an arbitrage. And so the peg kind of repegs every time there's an arbitrage opportunity, and market participants will ensure that peg is maintained on a longer time horizon. But with ETH, obviously, that's not possible. Liquidity is the second most important thing. And then post that, it's more about creating other use cases, whether it's money markets. So can you borrow against liquid staked ETH or liquid staked Atom? For folks who, let's say, you're a long-term BNB holder, and you sell covered calls on BNB, why not sell it on liquid staked BNB where you're earning staking rewards and earning premiums from the call options that you're selling? So it's basically more efficient capital allocation at the end of the day. High level speaking, in summary, I don't think there's anything sets us apart from Anchor, or that there's anything about Anchor that sets us apart from anybody else. It's like the validator business, right? Where you have multiple validator nodes and service providers. As long as a validator provides solid uptime, at the most basic level, it becomes a pretty undifferentiated service. Obviously, you can keep playing around in terms of the use cases that you create for the liquid staked asset. And we have interesting ideas around, for example, Atom has an unbonding period. You can have immediate redemption. So if you want to get out of the liquid staked Atom position, you can obviously sell the liquid staked Atom on the DEX where there is liquidity, but you can have alternative ways to exit quickly as well. So you can have instant redemption, for example, of liquid staked Atom back into Atom for a small fee. And so those are interesting use cases that you can create. But fundamentally speaking, I don't think there is too much that you can do to make yourself be different. I think it boils down to three things: security, liquidity, and the use cases that you create for the liquid staked asset.
And that explains a lot. And I think in that explanation, you differentiated yourself, like compared to other episodes and other guests we've had on the show when they've talked about liquid staking. I want to take a step back. You mentioned security, and it's November, and October used to be called Uptober. Now it's be called Hacktober. Again, to the best of your knowledge and experience, like what should we be doing? People who are working in crypto or influencing crypto, in my case, like what should we be doing to ensure smart contract security? Or are we at the apex of smart contract security and we just have to accept it as this is the way things are?
High level speaking, I think from a principles perspective, people forget that this is early stage tech. High level, people forget that there are no free lunches in the world, that the APYs that crypto provides, which is also no longer the case because the APYs themselves have come down. But those APYs come with costs. Those APYs are there because to compensate people with risk appetite for the risks that they're taking by using some of the applications. On a long enough time frame, do we get to a point where everything is secure? One can obviously hope for that day. Is it going to be a messy path towards getting there? Absolutely, as has been the case. Do projects, and especially legitimate projects that are building for the long term, do they prioritize security now? Absolutely. I think most legitimate founders, legitimate projects have security auditors on retainers for continuous audits. But again, I think it does come with risks. Let's say the blue chip DeFi applications like, let's say, Aave, there's a lot of people, I think, wanting to attack an application like that, but that has so far stood the test of time. So I think in terms of long-term sustainable applications, definitely there are examples. Are there risks still? 100%. So again, not a very good answer, but high level, I think it's just risk reward ultimately, and those high APYs come with risks.
No, I think that's a great answer, being very realistic, very down to earth, and I appreciate it. Tushar, coming back to persistence, I know before this podcast, I had a bunch of questions from a community. We have a few members who are Atom holders, some who are big Atom holders, but they're, as I mentioned to you before the show, they're like just regular people who they bought a bunch of crypto. They looked at the top 10, they're like, okay, buy, 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 buy. And they're like, okay, I'd like to get started with liquid staking. If they're going to the Persistence website or the PStake website, what is the process for them getting started using your application?
Yeah. So high level speaking, like I mentioned, we had a 2-token model for issuing liquid staked Atom. We're deprecating that and launching a V2 on the 8th of November. And so I would encourage folks to wait for another week or so before they use. And I'm not sure what date this podcast goes live. High level speaking, for folks that have used any other DeFi applications, it's not a very complicated process. You go to app.pstake finance. We have a few options. There's BNB, there's XPRT itself. Let's say if you have Atom, XPRT being the native asset of Persistence, by the way. If you choose Atom, then essentially what you end up doing is, again, I think most folks store Atom in a wallet called Kepler, which is the equivalent of MetaMask in the Cosmos ecosystem. And so essentially you'll just have to connect your wallet and deposit your atoms and mint liquid staked atoms, and you'll start earning rewards. We will be bootstrapping pools on Osmosis, which is the largest DEX in the Cosmos ecosystem, the equivalent of Uniswap, let's say, in the Cosmos ecosystem. Most likely we'll be bootstrapping the STK Atom pool. So it's a stable pool. We launching with that. Folks can supply liquid to that pool and earn some extra rewards on top. There will be some external incentives that we'll be putting in place. Overall, it's not a very complicated process for folks who have used other DeFi applications. For the uninitiated, there may be a bit of reading to do, and we'll have, I think, on docs.pstake.finance, we'll have end user facing documentation, but overall shouldn't be too complex. If it's too complex, we haven't done our job well.
No, I think it sounds easy, and I think you equated Kepler to MetaMask. I think that's a good comparison. So I know the 2 or 3 people that asked this question, basically for them, the extra step is getting Kepler installed on whatever device they're using for crypto, transferring it from, I think one guy is Binance, another 2 people are, I don't know what their exchange is, transferring that atom from their centralized exchange to the wallet, and then from there connecting to the pStake app after November 8th when you launched V2.
Yes, correct.
Nice. Very cool. Okay. Another sort of, again, very novice crypto question is, I have a lot of people, when we've had liquid staked people come on the show, they're like, okay, how does this work? How are you guys double dipping? You're earning interest and you have this sort of liquid stake thing that you can earn interest on top of that as well, right? So I guess not even a high level way, on a low level way, how do you explain to regular people, basic crypto users, how this is all working for them, that this is not some sort of Ponzi scheme, as the media likes to call it?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is, I think if we talk about the word staking itself, right, we're talking about liquid staking, proof of stake as a consensus mechanism. I think in the 2020 and 2021 sort of DeFi cycle, folks learned about staking for the first time. And I think what most people don't realize still is that DeFi staking is very different from proof of stake or POS staking. So DeFi staking was majorly governance coins, where you stake the governance coin of a DeFi application and you get to call the shots on certain decisions that application is making. In the case of, let's say, proof of stake or delegated proof of stake, when end users stake, or when end users delegate their assets to a validator that is validating transactions, the yield is actually coming from the protocol itself. You're taking part in consensus. So when you stake your ETH and you're earning, now that ETH is migrated from view to POS, you're actually taking part in consensus. So you're actually getting rewarded how miners would get rewarded in the past. That's where the yield is coming from. And I think that's a big distinction that most folks fail to understand, that in the case of DeFi staking or staking of governance coins, the application is choosing to give certain APYs for folks that they have minted themselves to folks that are staking DeFi coins, and they get to participate in governance. Whereas if you're staking ETH, Sol, AVAX, Atom, BNB, which are all some form of proof of stake, you're actually taking part in consensus. And the yield is coming from inflation from the underlying protocol itself, similar to how Bitcoin miners get paid for the new blocks that they're mining. I think it's very important to understand where the yield is coming from. In the very first instance, the first leg of the yield is being paid by the protocol itself. Obviously, now that we talked about the difference between DeFi staking and proof of stake staking, liquid staking is basically taking a step further. Let's say a user has Atom and the user is making that choice between staking and liquid staking. So as an Atom holder, I can choose to not liquid stake. I can just choose, I have, let's say, Atom in my Kepler. I can just choose 100 plus validators that are validating for the Cosmos Hub. I can, through the wallet, essentially stake with any of the validators that I like, or any of the validators that has a good track record or a good brand or low commission, whatever my criteria for staking is. I can choose to do that and earn whatever the yield is. I think last I checked, I think Atom was paying about 18-19% yield on staking Atom. Liquid staking is going a step further, where you say, okay, I want to double dip, right? Not only do I want the 18-19%, I want to do other things with my asset. The problem with normal staking is that the good thing is, okay, I'm getting 18-19%, I should be happy. But essentially what happens, like I mentioned with the Cosmos Hub, you have an unbonding period where once you stake, if you want to unstake, that takes X number of days before you get your assets back. So your assets actually become illiquid for a certain amount of time. Also, you cannot use your staked Atom position anywhere else. For liquid staking, what liquid staking solution providers do is if you stake Atom not directly to a validator, but through the pstake application, in the background, pstake as an application will delegate the Atom to multiple validators and keep collecting yield. In return, what pstake is doing is issuing a representative coin called STK Atom that is accruing those rewards. And you can take this STK Atom and go to a DEX and provide liquidity, or go to a money markets platform and put STK Atom as collateral and borrow USDC, for example. And that's where things get interesting, because STK Atom is a yield bearing asset. It's making about 18, 19%. And you're putting that as collateral. And let's say your USDC borrowing cost, hypothetically, is 10%. As long as the Atom price stays flat, you're earning 18, 19% on that liquid staked Atom, and you're borrowing USDC at 10%. So you can actually create very interesting use cases like self-repaying loans, where you take the staking rewards that the Atom is providing to pay off interest expenses, and maybe even some part of the principal over time. And like I said at the very beginning of the episode, you are introducing new risks when you do this, right? So if you just decide to stake, that comes with its own risks. If the validator goes down, or validator has downtime, or the validator double signs a transaction, your stake will get slashed. So the risk parameters of staking are there. If you liquid stake, you're taking all of those risks in terms of validators getting slashed. Obviously, we mitigate those risks by distributing the stake to multiple validators and not having one val be the recipient of the delegations from pstake as an application. But a new kind of risk is introduced, which is smart contract risk, or in our case, we're building the pstake application in a modular way, which is something, again, people don't understand in Cosmos as a whole. Unless you use Cosmos, you build everything in modular ways. You build modules and not smart contracts. But anyway, I don't want to go into that complexity, but you are introducing essentially a smart contract risk to simplify things. But it really depends on what your risk appetite is. And we're not saying that liquid staking is for everyone. But if you want more efficient usage of your capital, where you want to earn staking rewards, but want to also supply liquidity to a DEX and earn extra transaction fees from the swaps that are happening, or extra incentives that might be there for LPing into a pool on Osmosis, for example, or you want to borrow against your liquid staked asset by making sure you're earning staking rewards while you put a POS asset as collateral, then liquid staking is for you. So it's not a simplistic answer, and it's not something that folks understand, but I think should be whenever anyone is providing assets into any kind of platform, I think the end user should know where the yield is coming from. And any yield comes with risks, which is, again, finance 101 in terms of risk reward, which, again, people tend to forget. And yeah, high level speaking, I think folks should do due diligence on the platforms they're using, figure out where the yield is coming from, what are the kinds of risks you're taking as an end user, and then make a financial decision in terms of whether that reward is worth the risk.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's very true and explained very well, especially when it comes to explaining where yield comes from in general. Thank you for that. One of the things people will notice, like when they go to your site, is you guys are on, of course, Cosmos, BNB chain, Ethereum as well. And I was wondering, are there plans in 2023 to move to other EVM chains, like maybe some of the latest hotness like Metis, or even go to the sort of Rust, Solana, Aptos sort of stuff? Are you guys compete in liquid staking in those areas? Or are you just strictly focused on Cosmos EVM stuff for the next 1 to 2 years or so?
Yeah, so this is something we've debated internally as well in terms of how thin do we want to spread ourselves. I think for now, we want to be focused on Cosmos assets. That's where majority of our focus is. BNB in the background actually uses Tendermint. So at some level, in a tangential way, they are part of the Cosmos ecosystem because they use Tendermint for consensus in the background. And ETH for us makes sense. We've not pushed out too much marketing for our liquid staked ETH product because of risks around depegging. So we have the solution ready. We have the team. We followed the merge very closely. We're following all the developments, but we'll only start pushing the product once staking is allowed so that the arbitrage cycle for maintaining the peg can be performed. But high level speaking, our focus is going to be Cosmos assets, BNB, which in a tangential way is part of the Tendermint family. Tendermint is the consensus engine that powers Cosmos, for those in the audience that are not aware. And ETH, because ETH is the largest POS asset. And for us, I think it would be unwise to not go after that, even if we're a small player there. So going forward, we want to double down on Cosmos for the most part and create interesting use cases for liquid staked assets within the Cosmos ecosystem on top of persistence as the app chain. And that is, again, I think, not to confuse people. And this is something we were talking about at the beginning of the episode as well, in terms of what is an app chain. Ethereum is a general purpose chain. So you have all kinds of applications, whether it is a DeFi application, an NFT application, or in some cases, even like enterprise applications, all being built on the same chain. Solana is a general purpose chain. The Cosmos philosophy is that at some level, each application or a small group of applications need different parameters in terms of how secure do you need the chain to be? What should be the unbonding time for the POS asset that is securing the chain? Do you want fast finality? Do you want to optimize for security? And so you need a lot of validators and huge market cap so that we spin up new chain. So for example, Osmosis is a chain that is geared towards the DEX use case in Cosmos. Umi is an app chain that is geared towards the money markets use case. Injective is an app chain in the Cosmos ecosystem that is geared towards derivatives. Persistence is an app chain that is geared towards liquid staked assets. And then there is the IBC protocol, which is inter-blockchain operability, which is built into Cosmos, where you have these multiple app chains like Persistence, Injective, Juno, Osmosis, Umi, where you have native interoperability built in between these applications or these different chains. So you can move asset from Osmosis to Persistence, from Persistence to Umi, from Umi to Injective, from Injective to Juno, Juno to Cosmos Hub. And it's the same philosophy that Avalanche is now following with their subnets. In different ecosystems are calling it different things. I forgot what Polygon calls it. Binance is coming up with their own app chains. I think each ecosystem has their own word. In Cosmos, they're called hubs and zones. So hub is like you have multiple sort of bigger chains which act as hubs, and zones are essentially the smaller app chains. And Persistence is endeavoring to be the liquid staking hub, essentially. So we want to be one of the major chains focused on liquid staked assets. Similar to Osmosis, acts as a hub for the most liquid DEX within the Cosmos ecosystem. I actually forgot what the initial question was. I went into explaining what app chains are.
And it's good that you explained it, because it definitely helps some people who are not familiar with Cosmos to understand. My initial question was, and I think you already answered it, was that are you guys thinking about expanding to Rust-based chains?
Yeah, so again, Persistence itself is CosmWasm enabled. And CosmWasm essentially creates functionality for Cosmos app chains to have smart contracts. Like I mentioned, the Cosmos SDK, Persistence SDK is built on top of the Cosmos SDK. And for example, even SDK Atom, which is the application, the V2, which is what we have going live on the 8th of November, was built in a modular way. Which is not using smart contracts, which is built using modules that are part of the Persistences. But going forward for the development of other applications on top of Persistence, we have now enabled CosmWasm, which essentially requires Rust developers to build applications. So Solana is not the only ecosystem which is trying to engage with Rust developers. There's a lot of Rust developers now building within Cosmos. So if you want to build through the modular way, you use Golang. And if you want to go the smart contract way, you use Rust in the Cosmos ecosystem. And so now there are, I think Osmosis is CosmWasm enabled. Juno is CosmWasm enabled. Persistence is CosmWasm enabled. I don't know other chains which are. Terra was CosmWasm enabled, actually. Also, people don't know that Terra was a Cosmos app chain as well. But that became a really big app chain. It was powered by Tendermint. And and actually Terra was the one that made CosmWasm, let's say, production ready. They were the ones that bet heavily on CosmWasm, and that's how they created so many applications, which included Astroport, Mars Protocol, Levana, all of which are now doing something in the Cosmos ecosystem. on different app chains. This quick primer on the history of applications within Cosmos.
Nice. Thank you for the primer. Tushar, we're heading towards the end of the show, and I was wondering, is there anything else about persistence that we haven't talked about that you'd like to mention? Something coming up next year. We know V2, right, coming up in November, which is awesome, exciting. For anyone who has any familiarity about Cosmos, yeah, that's really exciting. So anything else you'd like to mention before we end off today's show?
What we're trying to do at Persistence is create like a small DeFi ecosystem around liquid staked assets. So Persistence is the base layer. P-Stake is the first piece of the puzzle. But once, like I said, once you issue liquid staked assets in a secure manner, what you want to do is create liquidity for it, create money markets for those liquid staked assets. While we will be doing that on other applications in the Cosmos ecosystem, like Osmosis, like 𝕂𝕁, what we want to do is also bootstrap liquidity on a DEX in the Persistence ecosystem. So we're working with few external development houses and labs to build a DEX focused on liquid staked assets, to build money markets focused on liquid staked assets. So we'll have our own little ecosystem. And that's why if you go through the initial description of Persistence, it says it's a specialized layer one. So we're not a general purpose layer one like Solana or general purpose layer one like Ethereum. We're a very specialized layer one focused on liquid stake, and then little use cases around liquid staked assets. So that's a little niche that we're carving for ourselves. It used to be a lot more complicated to explain this 6 months ago, but I think it's getting easier and easier as I think people in the industry are getting more well versed with why app chains and why Cosmos, and yeah. So there's a lot in store for us. It's been an interesting journey for us. This is my 6th year in crypto, and things are getting better, and I'm learning new things, a lot of which are non-crypto related as well, which kind of really help in running some. Persistence has grown, right? So I've had to grow with it, and that's been an interesting journey. We're doing interesting things. Read about us, research, ask questions. Very happy to answer, engage with us, and keep a lookout for Persistence. I think you'll be hearing a lot more from us.
Nice. That's fantastic. I have all your socials, Tushar's and Persistence, of course. I'll include them in the podcast, in the YouTube video as well. So just like Tushar said, if you'd like to reach out to Persistence or Tushar, I'm sure you can just hit him up on Twitter or some other form of social media. Thank you very much, Tushar, for joining us today. And hopefully we can get you on next year, possibly when you start planning for a V3 or whatever other exciting thing that's going to come down your way. I appreciate your time. Again, if you guys have questions for me, you want me to pass on to Tushar, if you're too shy, you can always tweet at me, and would love to get him on next year sometime. So Tushar, I wish you the best rest of your afternoon, and then hopefully we'll talk sometime next year.
Thank you, Kriyan, and thanks to Inside Crypto Podcast. You have a good evening.
You too.